Live?
We're live.
Okay, so in the year 240, King Shapur I ascended the throne of the Sassanid Empire. The Sassanid Empire was the third great empire in Persia. There was the Persian Empire, later came the Parthian Empire, later the Sassanid Empire. And King Shapur was the second ruler in the Sassanid dynasty. And he became very famous for his tremendous military victories over the Romans. He conquered most of Mesopotamia, Syria, Antioch, and he also was famous for being the first one, and possibly the only one, to ever capture a Roman emperor alive in battle, Emperor Valerian. I think this was perhaps the only time that a Roman emperor was ever captured in battle. But besides for all of his military victories, he was also very famous, and the Talmud discusses him very often. He was very friendly with the Jewish people. His personal doctor, his personal physician, was the great sage, the great Talmudic sage Shmuel, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in the city of Nahar. And besides being his personal physician, Shmuel was also a very close friend of his, and they had many discussions about many different topics, including many deep halakhic topics. And King Shapur said to Shmuel that I was very careful in all of my battles, even though I conquered many Roman cities that were full of Jewish people. I was very careful not to harm Jews at any time during my battle. The Talmud says there was one exception to this. There was the city of Mezigas Caesarea, Mezigas Caesarea, which was in the Haputia region, which is some region in Egypt, some country that used to exist in Egypt, where Egypt is today. And over there, the Talmud says that the Jewish community led a rebellion against King Shapur, and King Shapur came in and he killed 12,000 Jews. And the Gemara says that when Shmuel heard the news, he did not tear his clothes. Because he said, they chose to rebel against the king who's kind to the Jewish people, never persecuted them, it's their fault, right? I'm not going to tear my clothes over that. And Shmuel did not tear his clothes when this happened. But other than that, the Gemara says that King Shapur was very careful in all of his battles not to harm the Jewish community, except in this one case where the Jewish community specifically rebelled against them. The Gemara also relates that King Shapur took part in many halachic discussions. The Gemara tells us in the Gemara tells us that he had a discussion with Rav Chama about burial. There was a big discussion. Apparently, in Persia, they had different burial customs, and he asked Rav Chama, where does the Torah say that a person has to be buried in the ground? And Rav Chama didn't answer him. And the Gemara asked, why didn't Rav Chama answer him? From the verse that says, "Ki kavar sikverenu b'yemahu," which is speaking about a person who's hanged. So it says you cannot leave him hanging overnight. You have to remove him and bury him on that day. So the Gemara says cover doesn't necessarily mean in the ground. It can mean, putting him in some sort of box, in some sort of mausoleum. I don't know what the Persians used to do in those days, but it doesn't necessarily mean buried in the ground. The Gemara says, well, we learn out of the double expression, kavar tikverenu. You shall be buried, shall he be buried, that has to be in the ground. The Gemara says that King Shapur, as wise as he was a goy, and if you would tell him the double expression, he would say that's just poetic license. It's not you can't really learn from that. He wouldn't accept that teaching. So then the Gemara asks, why didn't we answer him from the many tzaddikim in the Torah who were buried? Abraham Avinu, most of the patriarchs were buried. Matriarchs were all buried in the ground in the Maras Machpelah. And the Gemara says he would have said that was just custom in those days, but the Torah doesn't say you have to do it. So why didn't they tell him that Hashem himself buried Moshe Rabbeinu? Well, says the Gemara, that's not good. It's not really a good proof because even Hashem himself tries to follow the local custom. So if the custom was to bury people in the ground, Hashem buried Moshe in the ground, but there's no proof from there that it must be done. The Gemara in Bava Metzia also relates another discussion where he got involved in about where there are two gardens, one on top of the other, and there's like plants growing out of the side of the upper garden into the ear space of the lower garden, and King Shapur was involved in all the different opinions, and he liked the opinion of Rav Shimon, and he gave credit to Rav Shimon when he heard his opinion. And besides for all these halachic discussions that he was involved in, the Gemara actually says something very interesting. The Gemara says that Shmuel, the friend of King Shapur, was referred to in a few places. We find this in Bava Batra and in Psachim, that the great Talmudic sage Shmuel is called King Shapur. Why is he called King Shapur? So Rashi says because King Shapur was a big Torah scholar like Shmuel, and also whatever King Shapur said, everybody listened to. So to Shmuel. Shmuel's word was like the edict of a king. So they called Shmuel King Shapur. King Shapur also participated, besides for studying, he also participated in many Jewish events. The Gemara in Sukkah tells us that he participated in a Simchas Beis HaShe'eva event. It's not unclear whether he actually hosted the event or he just joined the big celebration that was taking place. And the Gemara says that Shmuel danced before King Shapur, juggling 8 cups of wine during the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. Managed not to spill. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah tells us a very interesting story. It says that Rav Yehuda and Bati Bar Tuvi, this is not a rabbi, but this is a Jewish, I guess a very wealthy Jew who had political connections. So Rav Yehuda and Bati Bar Tuvi went to visit King Shapur. They were being entertained by King Shapur. And they brought out, they were hosted in the king's palace. And then during the day, they had a meal together and they brought out estrogen for them to eat. And the king took a knife, he picked up an esrog, he took a knife, he cut it open, and he ate the esrog. Then he proceeded to pick up a second esrog, he took the knife, he cut it open, and he gave some to Bati Bar Tuvi. And then he picked up a third esrog for Rav Yehuda, but he immediately realized Rav Yehuda was not going to eat his esrog because his knife was in the royal palace and it was used with non-kosher food. So what's he supposed to do? Anybody knows the halacha over here? Let's see who's as learned as King Shapur. What do you do? It's not hot, right? The esrog is cold. You don't need to kasher it or anything. But there's a concept of duchta de sakina, the pressure of the knife. And King Shapur took the knife. He realized that even though the knife was cold, but because it was cutting through and it was exerting a lot of pressure, so you cannot use it because it through the pressure it absorbs the taste of the non-kosher food. So he took the knife and he stuck it into the hard ground 10 times. That's the way to remove the taste that was absorbed. So there are different opinions exactly how many times. He was very machmir. He did 10 times. Today you can do the same thing. I mean, today, if it was only used for cold and it was not used for anything hot, you can do that today also.
But that was an old wives' tale.
So King Shapur took it, he stuck it into the ground 10 times, and then he cut open the esrog for Rav Yehuda. So Bati Bar Tuvi was very offended by this. He's like, "What? I'm not a Jew? For him, you're gonna kasher the knife and not for me?" And the Gemara records 2 different versions of the emperor's answer. The first version is he says, "You're a Jew, but you're not that scrupulous in your in following Jewish law. And I knew that Rabbi Yehuda would not eat it, but I knew you would end up eating it." That's the first version. The second version, the Gemara says, is that since they're both being hosted in the palace, so when you're hosted in the royal palace, they provide you, of course, with a room, a bed, and many other amenities. Today, if you're hosted in a royal palace, they'll probably give you Wi-Fi. They'll make sure that you have a nice shower. There's everything you need. Everything you need is going to be provided for you. And among the Persian amenities, says the Gemara, were women. That was provided for the royal guests. Mm-hmm. So the king turns to Bati Bar Tuvi and he says, "Last night, Rabbi Yehuda sent the women away, and you didn't. So I figured it was okay to give you the non-kosher answer." So the Gemara in Brachos tells us that King Shapur says to Shmuel, "You're so wise," and the verse in the Torah says that Chacham Adif Mi Navi, a wise man, is greater than a prophet. So perhaps you can tell me, in your great wisdom, what I will dream about tonight. So Shmuel thought about it, and he says to him, "You're going to dream tonight that you will go to battle against the Romans, and you will be captured in battle. And the Romans will throw you into prison, and they will force you to grind dates. But because you're a king, instead of giving you an ordinary mill to grind dates, they will provide you with a golden mill to grind the dates. So this picture, of course, was, on one hand, it was a very frightening picture for the king to be captured and thrown into prison and forced to grind dates. But on the other hand, it was a little bit comical, it was a little bit strange, because this golden mill is something you've never seen before. So the picture stuck in the king's mind, and he couldn't get it out of his head all day. And sure enough, that night, that's what he dreamed about. After thinking about it all day, that's what he dreamed about. The Gemara says a similar story with Rabbi Yeshua ben Chanina, who was asked by the Roman emperor what he's going to dream about, and he also said that you're going to go to war against Persia, and they're going to capture you, and they're going to force you to lead the animals with a golden staff. And again, the same story. He thought about it all day, and he dreamt about it at night. So now let's go to the final story, which is the reason why we brought this all down. The Gemara tells us in Megillah, in Sanhedrin, that King Shapur once says to Shmuel, you're always talking about Mashiach and about God how Hashem is going to send Mashiach for redeem the Jewish people. It's taken a long time. How's Mashiach getting here? How's he supposed to get here? So Shmuel says, well, the pasuk says that it's going to be an oni v'rosh v'alachamar. He's going to be a poor, humble man riding on a donkey. So the king says, of course, that's what's taking him so long. Who's riding on a donkey? He says, here, he takes out a document, he says, I want you to go to the royal stables and pick out the finest horse in the royal stables and have it ready for Mashiach needs to get here. He'll get here much quicker and he'll get here in style. Right? Today, we hear Mashiach's coming, send us a limo to get him riding on a donkey. So Shmuel says, well, I've never been to the royal stables. Do you have nice horses there yet? He says, of course, in many different colors. Of course, white, black, brown, orange. He says, do you have any horses that are 100 different colors? The king's like, no thing. He says, okay, the Mashiach donkey is there. That's what he says. This is the story in the Gemara. Mashiach's donkey is better than your horse. So what's going on over here? First of all, what's the king's problem in the first place? What's this whole discussion? And what's up with these 100 colored horse that can't match the donkey of Mashiach? So the Gemara Megillah tells us that King Shapur was not the only Gentile king who had a problem with the Jewish leader riding on a donkey. The Gemara Megillah tells us that King Ptolemy, king of Egypt, the Greek king, he gathered together 70 rabbis. He brought them into 70 separate rooms, and he asked them to translate the Torah into Greek. And the Torah tells us that even though they're in 70 separate rooms, they all translated the Torah exactly the same. And there were a few changes. There were 13 changes that were made in the Torah. One of the changes that was made was in this week's Torah portion. Oh, Ari wants to tell us one of the changes. So the Torah starts off, Bereshis bara Elokim. In the beginning, Hashem created. They didn't want to say in the beginning Hashem created, because if you would translate that into Greek, it could sound like there's some beginning creation that's creating God. So they changed it to Elokim bara Bereshis, instead of Bereshis bara Elokim, that God created in the beginning instead of in the beginning God created. That's the first difference. The first change they made. Another change is in this week's Torah portion. What?
Not allowed to eat a rabbit.
Oh, so what did they say?
They said you're not allowed to eat something that has that doesn't cut out.
That has small legs. Yeah, they said that's an animal with small legs. And the reason why they didn't say rabbit, Mendy, is
it's because his wife is on him.
His wife's name was the Greek equivalent of rabbit. So that was the second difference. Another difference is in this week's Torah portion. Moshe Rabbeinu was traveling to Egypt, and the Torah says he took his wife and his children, and he put them on the donkey to ride to Egypt. So these rabbis came along. They said, you can't say that he rode on the donkey. King Ptolemy is not going to be happy with the donkey business. Just like King Shapur wasn't happy with the donkey. And therefore, they changed it. Instead of saying they rode on the donkey, they said, he took some form of transportation, some sort of people carrier. That was the words they used. They didn't describe which transportation. And this was actually very complicated, because this is not the only time that Torah refers to the donkey. Later, when Moshe is speaking to the Jewish people before he passed away, he says to them, I didn't take a donkey from any of you. So this refers to the original donkey. But now that he took out the story of the original donkey, they have a problem. What is Moshe talking about later? So they have to make another change. Instead of saying, I didn't take a donkey, they said, I didn't take anything from any one of you. So we see that this was not, that King Shapur was not the only king who had a problem with donkeys. King Talmai also had this problem. And it's two different donkeys. There's Mashiach's donkey, and now there's Moshe Rabbeinu's donkey. So what's the connection between these two donkeys? So Rashi comes along, and he says they're actually the same donkey, right? There's one donkey. This donkey, we first hear about him. We're first introduced to this donkey in times of Avraham Avinu, when he's going to the Akedas Yitzchak. He's going to sacrifice his son Yitzchak, and he takes the donkey and he puts the wood and the fire, whatever he's using to light the fire, he puts it all on the donkey. And then many years later, the same donkey is still around in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu puts his wife and children on the donkey, and this same donkey is going to live for thousands of years until the time of Mashiach, and Mashiach is going to ride on this donkey. So we need to understand that we hear quite a few things. First of all, why do you need this donkey to live? What does this donkey represent? Why does it need to live so long? And why do they only use the same donkey? And why did they choose a donkey in the first place? Why didn't they listen to King Shapur and King Talmai and get a nice horse for the Jewish leaders to ride on? And so in order to understand this, we'll answer this with let me see. And also, of course, why did Shmuel say that this donkey is somehow better than the king's horse? Unless it had 100 different colors. What does that mean, 100 different colors? And how is the donkey better? So, in his youth, the Baal Shem Tov, before he revealed himself as a great Jewish leader and a teacher of Hasidus, he used to travel around from place to place and speak to simple Jews. Wherever he used to go, he used to meet simple Jewish people and he used to ask them, how are you doing? How's life? How's everything going? How's your work? How's your business? And everyone used to answer like a Jew answers, Baruch Hashem. Some of them had complaints, some of them didn't, but everybody answered Baruch Hashem. And one day, the Baal Shem Tov arrives in this town, and he's going around asking everyone how they're doing. And he wants to, he thinks he asked everybody, but then he notices there's someone in the back of the shul. There's like a little room in the back of the shul, and there's somebody sitting inside. He wants to go inside and tell, no, don't go inside. This is Chaim the Parish, Chaim the ascetic. He sits alone all day. He sits and learns Torah, and nobody talks. They slip food under the door, and he sits and learns. Well, they don't bother. Well, I have to go talk to him. So he opens the door. He comes inside, and he says, "Hi, Chaim. What's up? How are things going?" Chaim. The Shem Tov sits down next to Chaim, and he says, "No, Chaim, how's breakfast today? How's it going? I see. I was a little cot over here. How's the bed? Is it comfortable?" Chaim's completely ignoring the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov seems to ask a few different questions. How's Chaim's food? How's his sleep? How's his day? Is it too noisy until he doesn't even ask him how his learning is going. He asks him how the food is, how the food and sleep is. So Chaim's completely ignoring him. So Hashem turns to Chaim and he says, "Why are you depriving Hashem of his parnasa, of his livelihood?" And at this, Chaim jumps up and looks at the Baal Shem Tov. What chutzpah? How dare you talk about Hashem like that?
What?
I'm taking away Hashem's parnasa. I'm taking away Hashem's livelihood. So the Baal Shem Tov says, I'm only repeating the words of David HaMelech. David HaMelech says, "V'ata kadosh, yoshev tehillas Yisrael." You Hashem are holy. You sit upon, you subsist on the praises of the Jewish people, which means that when the Jewish people praise Hashem, that gives Hashem sustenance, that gives Hashem what he needs. And you refuse to say Baruch Hashem. So the Rebbe brings down the story and he asks, the Baal Shem Tov wanted him to say Baruch Hashem. You could have asked him, how's your learning going? Right? Not how's the weather, not how's your bed, not how's your food. You could have asked him a question that applies to him. Why did he ask him this strange question? So the Frierdiker Rebbe relates that he was once traveling with his father, the Rebbe Rashab, and And the Rebbe Rashab wasn't feeling so good, and they had to stop the wagon. They had to go. They were going slowly on the side of the road, and suddenly they noticed something in the distance. They noticed two Jewish people sitting in the distance, and the Rebbe Rashab asked them to pull the wagon up there so they can see what's going on. And they see two Hasidim who were both school teachers, both Melamdim from the city of Vishenkovitz, and they're both sitting on the side of the road. Their names are Peretz and Reb Mendel, and they're sitting there on the side of the road talking. So the Rebbe Rashab asked the wagon driver to pull up right next to them, and the window's open, but these two teachers don't even notice that they're so involved in their conversation, and they're discussing a mimer that they had heard from the Rebbe. And they stood there for a few minutes, and then they continued traveling. And the Rebbe Rashab turns to the Frierdiker Rebbe and he says, I want you to know that, let me see the exact time frame. He says that for 5,661 years, 9 months, 13 days, 15 hours, and a certain amount of minutes, this area, this piece of land, has waited for Peretz and Mendel to come and talk the Brei Torah, to come learn Hasidus. This land was waiting for 5,000 years. Over 5,000 years, nobody did a mitzvah here. Nobody learned Torah. It was waiting for them to come and elevate. And this is what the Rebbe says is what's going on with the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov, of course, knew that it's very important to praise Hashem. But it's not just important to praise Hashem. It's important to praise Hashem regarding the physical matters of the physical world that we're involved in. Our job in this world is to elevate the world and to refine the world and make it holy. And therefore, when a Yid praises Hashem for the food that he eats, that food becomes holy. When a Yid praises Hashem for the bed that you sleep in, that bed becomes holy. Now, it's very nice if Reb Chaim would have praised Hashem for his Torah, but that wasn't the purpose. The purpose was that he should refine the physical world that he's living in. And Chaim had a hard time with this. He was an ascetic. He would sit and learn all day. He wasn't involved in the physical world. That's why the Baal Shem Tov insisted on asking him these questions. So this, explains the Rebbe, is what's going on with this donkey. The word donkey, chamor in Hebrew, is the same word is the same root as the word chumri, which means physicality. And the job of the Jewish people is to elevate and refine and make the physical world holy. And that's why we find these three great Jewish leaders, Avraham Avinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, and Mashiach, all rode on the donkey. They all elevated and brought the donkey, brought the physical world into their service of God and elevated and they made it holy. However, says the Rebbe, we find a major difference between the way Avraham Avinu used the donkey, Moshe Rabbeinu used the donkey, and Mashiach was going to use the donkey. Avraham Avinu, he did not ride on the donkey. He put his supplies on the donkey, right? He put the wood and the kindling, the fire starter on the donkey. Moshe Rabbeinu did not ride on the donkey either, but his wife and children rode on the donkey. And Mashiach is going to ride on the donkey himself. So why do we find this difference? Why do we have these three different ways of using the donkey? So we'll understand it through three different stories. Now, I know that we're talking about three donkeys, but the stories are going to involve a lion, a cow, and a donkey. Okay? So, and these stories represent the three ways of using the donkey. So our first story takes place in the year 1560. That year was a very dry year in Eretz Yisrael. There was no rain, and the Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael was struggling. They didn't have any food, and they decided to send to the Jewish community, the Jewish communities outside of Eretz Yisrael, to send a delegation asking for help, asking for tzedakah. Who are they going to send? So they chose the great Kabbalist Rabbi Avraham Galanti, who lived in Yerushalayim at the time, and they sent him to a few different communities, starting with the Jewish community in Constantinople. So he sets out on the boat and they travel to Constantinople. And as the boat is coming towards the port, they notice something very strange. Usually the port is very busy, full of people who are running around, but the port is completely empty. They see a few soldiers standing outside the port, but there aren't any people working in the port or walking around. The captain realizes this is trouble. Maybe there's some sort of war going on, some sort of coup, who knows? He's not going near the port. They're going to go to they're going to travel somewhere else. So Avram says, no, I have to go. I have a ticket. I'm going to Constantinople. I'm not bringing the boat near this port. And he says, okay, you have a rowboat. It's a little boat. They take off from the small boat. I'll get on, and one of the sailors can row me to shore. That's what they do. They row him to shore. He gets off, and the sailor rushes back to the big boat, to the ship. And he comes ashore, and a soldier comes running over to him. He's like, what are you doing here? Get back to your boat. Don't you know what happened? No, what happened? He says 2 lions escaped the sultan's personal zoo, and they're running around the city. And, we're soldiers, we want to shoot them, but the sultan forbade us from harming these lions in any way. We have to somehow figure out how to capture them without harming them. And everybody's at home. No, the city's on lockdown. And Ram says, okay, that's nice. And as he's talking, they hear some blood-curdling roar, and the soldier takes off, leaving Ram standing there. And the lion appears at the end of the street, and starts running towards Ram. And as soon as it reaches him, it stops and it lays down in front. So Ram grabs hold of its mane, he picks it up, and he starts walking with the lion. And as they're walking, the other lion joins in. He sees something going on with his friend. He comes running over, and again, he stops right next to Avram. Avram leads both of the lions towards the Sultan's palace. And the Sultan standing on the roof of the palace and directs them where to put the lions, where the lion cage is. And he leads them in. And he closes the cage, and everybody starts coming down. All people start coming out of their houses. And the Sultan calls Avram into his royal chamber. And he says, who are you? Where did you learn to tame lions? And where did you learn the craft? You must be a great lion tamer. He said, not a lion tamer. I'm a Torah scholar from Jerusalem. And he says, okay, so what's going on with my lions? And he says that when Hashem created the animals, it said that God instilled, our Chachamim tell us that God instilled within the animals a fear for human beings. And why do we not see that today? Why animals are supposed to respect humans. However, animals look at human beings, and to them, we look like animals, most of us. So they don't have any respect for us. But if a human being looks like a human being, then an animal will respect them. Wow, says the king is very impressed. Sultan is very impressed. What are you doing here? He tells him that he's on a mission to help the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. And the king sends a servant to the royal treasury to bring up some bag of gold, and he sends them off. And the Yidden in Yerushalayim have plenty to eat that. That's our first story involving a lion. I will get to our second story involving a cat. So, in the city of Frankfurt, a butcher comes to the rabbi, Rav Pinchas Horowitz, the Baal HaChlor, right? And he says he has a question. He has a question for him. He just shechted a cow, and there's a problem with the lungs of the cow. There's some sort of issue, some sort of complication. And he wants to know what the halacha is, if the cow is kosher. So Pinchas starts looking into he takes a svarim, he starts looking into it, and it looks a very difficult case because it's a very complicated law, and the Shach, one of the primary commentaries in the Shulchan Aruch, rules that this cow is forbidden, it's trade. But Rav Pinchas is sitting there and he's looking, he pulls out more books and more books and more books, he's going back and forth. Finally, after looking in the 100 different sources, he comes back to the butcher and he said, I found a way to permit the cow. So one of Rav Pinchas' students said, I don't understand. Why do you work so hard to permit the cow? The Shach says it's usher. You can tell him it's usher. You can tell him it's treif. And how could you argue with the Shach? The Shach is a very great rabbi, a very great halachic authority. So he says, I have great respect for the Shach. And I know that one day after 120, I'm going to come up to the heavenly court and I'm going to have to face the Shach. I'm going to have to explain to the Shach why I disagreed with him. And I'm a little nervous about that experience of having to face the Shach. But had I ruled that the cow was forbidden, then when I'm going to come up after 120, instead of having to face the shop, I would have to face the cow. The cow would come over to me and it would say, Pinchas, why did you say I'm straight if I was kosher? And then I would have to argue with the cow. So I would rather argue with the shop than argue with the cow, because the cow is going to come to me. He has a purpose in this world, and I can't forbid him from fulfilling his purpose in creation. His purpose is that a Jew should make a bracha on him and eat him on Shabbos, to honor Shabbos, and use the energy from this cow to serve Hashem. And I don't want to have to argue with this cow. That's our second story. The third story involves a donkey. The story actually appears both in the Bavli as well as the Yerushalmi. There are different versions. It could be as different stories, but we'll say it over as the Yerushalmi. No, the second story is in the 1800s. It's Frankfurt. The third story is about the great Talmudic sage Rav Pinchas ben Yair. And Rav Pinchas ben Yair owned a donkey. And one day a group of thieves came and stole his donkey. They were Jewish thieves, right? And they stole his donkey and they bring it back to their place, wherever they're staying. And they bring out food for the donkey, but the donkey doesn't want to eat. So they figure it's not hungry. Fine. The next day they again bring it food, and again it doesn't want to eat. And they see that it's it looks very weak, it can barely stand. And they're trying to feed it, but it's not eating. And 3 days go by, and the donkey barely is falling down on the ground. It can barely stand up. And they realize the donkey's going to die. They don't want it to die and smell up their leer, so they decide to bring it back to Rav Pinchas. So they bring it back to Rav Pinchas. Rabbi, we don't know what's wrong with your donkey, but we stole your donkey, and it doesn't want to eat. And Rav Pinchas says, "Well, where did you get the food?" Well, we bought it in the store. Who's the store owner? Is the store owner a Talmud Chacham or Amoritz? Amoritz. He says that it's demai. It's food that you buy from an Amoritz, and you don't know whether the Amoritz took Truma and Meiser properly, so you're not allowed to eat it. So my donkey doesn't want to eat it. So you say, but the halacha is that only a person is not allowed to eat the mai. You're allowed to use the mai to feed your animals. Only you are not allowed to eat the mai, but a person is allowed to feed his animals. Right? So Rebecca says, what do you want? What are you going to do? My donkey is not. The donkey is extra stringent, extra strict. So the Rebbe explains that in the idea of elevating the physical world, in the donkey of Avram and Moshe and Mashiach, there are three different ways that a Jew can interact with the world around him. And it's three different stages. The first step is, where the world around us is a big distraction, and it can be very difficult to serve Hashem in. So the first thing we have to do is make sure that the world around us does not interfere with our service. It doesn't stop us from serving Hashem. Right? We don't need to involve. We don't need to be involved in the physical world. But the first level is that the world around us does not stop a Jew from serving Hashem. It can even be a person can be in the physical world and serve Hashem. That's the first step. The second step is that he actually uses objects in the physical world to serve Hashem. Right? When a person does a mitzvah, he does a mitzvah with physical objects, and that makes these physical objects holy. However, they're only holy because I took them and did a mitzvah with them. Right? They're not holy on their own. They don't have their own holiness. They're only holy because I use them in the action of doing a mitzvah. And the third level is that we refine the world to such an extent that the world itself becomes holy. Not only can I use a physical object to do a mitzvah, but I can reveal that what's in the physical world is the greatest essence of godliness is found within this physical world. And these are the three different levels. These are the three different stages of Avram, Moshe, and Mashiach. Avram Avinu was before Matan Torah. At that time, people did not have the ability to make the physical world holy. They had the ability to live in the physical world and still do mitzvahs, even while they're in the physical world. Right? The world shouldn't harm them. The lions shouldn't attack the rabbi. They shouldn't be a distraction for us. And that's why Avram Avinu was able to take the donkey with him when he was doing a mitzvah. The donkey didn't really participate in the mitzvah. Avram and Yitzchak didn't actually ride on the donkey, but their supplies was on the donkey, and the donkey was there, and it didn't cause any problems. Then there's the second level. The second level is that a Jew can take a physical object and make it holy. That was added at the time of Matan Torah. That Moshe Rabbeinu was able to take this donkey and put his wife and children on the donkey, because Moshe's wife and children were part of Moshe Rabbeinu. They were his family. And the donkey was holier to a point that it was able to carry Moshe's wife and children. This was like Pinchas Horowitz's cow, who was not a holy cow, but he wanted to be part of the mitzvah. He wanted to be on Shabbos. He wanted to be a part of the bracha. He wanted to be involved in mitzvahs. But the cow itself wasn't holy, wasn't special. And then we have the third stage. The third stage is where we're aiming towards and where we're getting to, a point where the entire world will be full of godliness. Where everywhere we'll look within the world, we're going to see Hashem. We'll look at the donkey and we'll see that this donkey might be more strict in halacha than me, right? This donkey may be holier, has a holier source than me. And this is the third step of Mashiach, who he himself is going to ride on the donkey and be lifted up by this donkey. And this is something that Talmai and King Shapur were not able to understand, because they were goyim. They didn't get the Torah. They could understand Avraham Avinu's donkey. No one has a problem. King Shapur and King Talmai could relate to Avraham Avinu's donkey, but they cannot relate to Moshe Rabbeinu or Mashiach's donkey, because in order to elevate the donkey, you need Matan Torah, and the goyim don't have this. And this is what he told them, that there's 100 colors in this donkey. This represents the 10 svirot, the 10 divine attributes that were used to create the world. And each one of them we know is made up of 10. And that's why the physical world is going to shine with 100 different colors, because we're going to elevate every single aspect of this world. And just to conclude with the story, that the Gemara relates about a certain Jew, it doesn't say his name. Let's see where the story is from. That's Sunday March. Sikta Rabos Eric Yudal. It says that a Jew once owned a cow, a very special Jew. It doesn't tell us who it is. Apparently, a big tzaddik. He owned a cow. This cow worked in his field, and the cow worked in the field for many, many years, and until the Jew retired, and he had to sell his cow. Or maybe he lost his money, he had to sell his cow. So I'm not sure. I don't remember the details of the story. He had to sell his cow for some reason. And he sold it to the guy who lived next door. And the guy takes the cow, he brings it into his field, and the cow starts working. And the field, a very good, hard-working cow. And it works all day. The next day it gets up again. A few days go by until 4 days later, the guy gets up and he's trying to bring the cow to work, and the cow refuses to work. Sitting down, it doesn't want to move. Mm-hmm. So the guy takes out a stick and he starts beating the cow. The cow refuses to move. And he tries, he brings up good food. I don't know what food cows like. I don't know.
Shabbat?
What? It was Shabbat. The guy didn't know it was Shabbat. And the guy brings up some candy that the cow likes, and he puts it in front of the cow. The cow doesn't want to move. So he runs back to the Jew who sold him the cow, and he said, "You sold me a bad cow. You sold me a lemon. The cow refuses to work." And the Jew says, "Oh, of course, today is Shabbos. Don't worry, I'll speak to the cow." He goes out to the field. He whispers in the cow's ear. He says, "Until now, you belong to me. You belong to a Jew, so you didn't need to work on Shabbos. Now that you belong to a guy, you have no choice. You got to work on Shabbos." And the cow gets up, and it's ready to work. And the guy says, "What's going on over here? What witchcraft did you just perform?" And he explains to him that it's Shabbos and that the cow wants to work on Shabbos. The guy says, "I don't understand. This cow understands what Shabbos is, and I don't? I also want to learn about Shabbos." So he comes to the Jew's house, he starts learning, and eventually he converts to Judaism. And not only does he convert to Judaism, he goes to yeshiva to learn, and he becomes a big rabbi. And and he gave himself the name Yochanan, and he became known by the title Yochanan ben Torta, which means Yochanan, son of the cow. Because whenever anybody asked him, "How did you become a Jew? How did you learn Torah?" he said, "It's all due to the big cow, the frum cow that taught me everything." So that's that's really what Mashiach's donkey is all about. That even the cow, when a Jew is holy, not only does he become holy, but everything he's involved with becomes holy. And this cow, not only could the cow itself keep Shabbos, it could do it shlichus, and it could be megayer. This guy could reach out to this guy, and it could turn this guy into a Talmud Chacham. So yes, we're all getting close to that point, and we should all be able to turn our own donkeys and cows and lions and whatever we're working with into holy donkeys and holy cows, and we should all very soon see the poor humble man riding on the donkey. Mashiach ben David.
Stay tuned next Wednesday.
So we'll run it again.
He's going or not?